Welcome to this presentation on the connection between type 2 diabetes, obesity, and the microbiome. I've lumped these two conditions together in this presentation as they are so tightly linked. As I always say, it's all connected. So here we have diabetes and obesity, but I could easily have included vascular health, i.e. blood pressure, lipids, etc. But that will be in the cardiovascular presentation. I could also have included liver health, with both of those actually, but that has its own presentation as well. The health of your gut is strongly tied to all of these and much, much more, as you're learning from my videos. With that said, I'm going to give you a different perspective on the origins of diabetes and obesity, that of the microbiome connection. We won't dive into various facets of diet. We all know that there is a strong dietary component here. But we also know that the 40-plus-year-old attack on fats in our diet hasn't exactly been working. The low-calorie sugar substitute fad has also not worked as well, something I'll address in my video on diet and the microbiome. We also won't be talking about high fructose corn syrup, as that's in the liver health presentation. I also won't cover the lack of physical exercise here either, but we all know that diet and exercise play a large role. And yet, given this knowledge, things are worse than ever. How is that even possible? The International Diabetes Federation has estimated that type 2 diabetes currently affects over 463 million people in the world. In the US, for adults, the rate of obesity is 42%. The rate of being overweight is 31%. That's right. The rate of obesity is higher than that of being overweight. So together, 73% of Americans are either overweight or obese. That's insane. The direct medical costs in 2022 were estimated to be $307 billion. So if we as a society supposedly know so much about something as basic as prevention of obesity and blood sugar metabolism, then why are we such a mess? Well, the answer is a bit more complex, but also very simple. Here I'm going to present strong evidence of how the microbiome plays a large role in both of these conditions. And the microbiome, as you've come to learn, or will learn, is influenced by diet, drugs, exercise, and more. In about every presentation, I discuss the enormous benefits of butyrate. It is one of the most important compounds in our bodies. It is produced by a number of bacteria which have proven to be health promoters. And many studies show that not only is there an association of butyrate-producing bacteria with health, these bacteria also may have many direct biochemical connections with proteins in our bodies. The scientific community gives these proteins names like GLP, HDAC, AMPK, and more. Many more. It's mind-numbing, really, when you think about it. Our bodies are incredibly intricate, but as I often say, it really comes down to signals. What signals are you sending to and throughout your body? Via your diet, exercise, thoughts, and more. You can choose to send a certain set of signals for health, or an opposite set, and your cells and the foreign ecosystem inside of you will respond accordingly. Through these proteins and signals, butyrate has been shown to reduce liver glucose production, decrease inflammation, decrease endotoxemia, that's LPS in the blood, increase insulin sensitivity, and improve beta cell survival, differentiation, and proliferation. Beta cells make insulin in your pancreas. Butyrate has also been shown to increase satiety hormones that reduce your appetite, increase metabolism, stimulate the burning of fat for fuel, beta oxidation, and more. Let's take one of these proteins for example, AMPK, AMP activated protein kinase. It's a basic component of all life. It's an energy sensor. ATP is energy at its most basic level. AMP is a lesser version of ATP. When the body senses too much AMP in relation to ATP, such as in low food intake or prolonged exercise, this energy sensor notices and kicks off a variety of processes. Does this sound familiar? Like sirtuins. Those are other energy-sensing proteins kicked off by another key component of energy generation, NAD, another incredibly important compound for our health. You've probably learned that sirtuins are stimulated by resveratrol. These two energy-sensing proteins are sisters and work together via the same principles, the recognition of excess carbon intake or lack thereof. Butyrate has been shown to increase AMPK activity, which results in things you would need in famine or exercise, like the mobilization and efficient burning of fats for fuel. Do you know what popular diabetes drug has also been shown to increase AMPK? Metformin. So now we're going to dive into the connection between your microbiome and type 2 diabetes. Butyrate is a part of this equation. When there is a lack of butyrate, that signifies dysbiosis in the gut. When we have dysbiosis, we have inflammation in the gut. This causes permeability. And then LPS, something I discuss all the time, is able to escape the gut and go systemic in higher quantities than desirable. This causes systemic inflammation, as you see in my many videos. That's what we're going to discuss. This dysbiosis, permeability, inflammation, butyrate connection. I'm just going to show you a handful of studies I picked out of a mountain of evidence. But by the time we're done, you'll have a solid understanding. To start, I chose a PCOS study because metabolic syndrome is very common in PCOS. And in fact, obesity is the most common comorbidity. So, do you think this thing we call PCOS is happening in isolation, or is it part of a much larger systemic perturbation? You can see clear correlations from measures of the number of menstrual cycles with adiposity, the amount of fat, insulin resistance, insulin sensitivity, and zonulin. Zonulin I talk about on occasion in terms of gut permeability. The more zonulin, the more permeability. Here we see an inverse correlation. The more zonulin, the fewer the menstrual cycles. So we see a clear connection between menstrual dysfunction and gut permeability via dysbiosis. Here we have a study out of China with 90 subjects with type 2 diabetes as compared to 28 healthy controls. This study measured three things: serum LPS, which is the very pro-inflammatory component of gram-negative bacteria, zonulin, the signaling protein which causes gut permeability, and IFABP, which is the protein which binds with LPS to process it for elimination. All measures of gut permeability. Therefore, all measures of gut dysbiosis, an unhealthy balance of bacteria in the gut. Not only were there significant differences in all three between the healthy controls and the diabetes subjects, as seen in Table 2, but those with more severe blood sugar abnormalities, as measured by hemoglobin A1C, had even more gut permeability, highlighting this clear connection. So let's follow the sequence of events from this study. Gut dysbiosis drives up zonulin levels, as seen in Figure 2. As you can see, normal controls also have detectable zonulin levels, just significantly lower than those with type 2 diabetes. This increase in intestinal permeability results in significantly higher levels of serum LPS, due to more LPS in total in the gut and more release from the gut. Again, healthy controls have detectable levels of LPS. They are just significantly lower than ones with diabetes. This elevation in LPS causes an increase in inflammation, as shown here in B. I talk about TNF-alpha a bit. It's a good marker for inflammation, which is why it's used here. And again, you can see how healthy controls have detectable levels of TNF-alpha, just significantly lower than the diabetes folks. Via inflammation, LPS reduces muscle insulin sensitivity for one. It also damages insulin production in the pancreas. It also reduces serum HDL, that's the good guy, as HDL plays a key role in its disposal. In fact, other studies show that the administration of HDL reduces the deleterious effects of LPS, and similarly, those with low HDL show a greater inflammatory response to LPS. LPS also results in increased triglyceride levels. So what is the root cause to the sequence of events? Again, look to the gut. Look for dysbiosis. Here we have a study from Tunisia showing significantly lower levels of F. prausnitzii and A. muciniphila in those with type 2 diabetes as compared to healthy controls. I talk about these two bacteria all the time. In fact, I have entire presentations dedicated to each of these. These bacteria aren't just relevant for one country or another. We're all humans. We all share a common evolution with the same bacterial exposure, in general. The health promoters in Tunisia are the same as in Japan, Canada, and Australia. The same opportunistic pathogens that are in China are the same that are in India, the UK, and Germany. I have been through thousands of papers. Once you read everything, the data becomes remarkably consistent. And to note, in this paper, Eosinophila was significantly negatively correlated with hemoglobin A1C. That's a good thing. More on that later. My data points from the many studies in my meta-analysis also come from this paper out of India. I don't know why in the world these authors would state, quote, "This may imply that these 11 genera are specific to Indians with type 2 diabetes." No, they're not specific to India. These taxa are like a who's who of good across the world. You've heard me many times state how Roseburia, Lactobacilli, Coprococcus, and Anarostipes are universal health promoters. Well, all those and more were significantly decreased in the diabetic subjects in the study compared to healthy controls. And I always talk about E. coli, which was shown to be significantly higher in the diabetic subjects. Again, we share not only the same themes, but the same bugs. Only 2 of these taxa I don't see with any frequency in global data. My data also comes from studies like this, which I included in the presentation for a couple of reasons. For one, this paper includes data for newly diagnosed diabetics and existing patients who were on medication. As we mentioned, metformin is popular and not only affects AMPK, but also has been shown to affect the microbiome, as drugs do. One such taxon is Eosinophila. A number of studies show that metformin increases Eosinophila abundance. So it's good to see the data split amongst the drug-naive versus existing patients. Factors when considering a microbiome analysis. And here we see how Eosinophila was significantly lower in the newly diagnosed versus the healthy controls. But in those on medication, it bumped up and was significantly higher. The other reason is figure 5 here. We see correlations between markers for glucose control and the various taxa altered. We see how the more E. coli there is, the more blood sugar there is. This relationship is also true for the so-called probiotic Lactobacillus. Speaking of Lactobacillus, this study also shows ugly data for it. In fact, in just about every presentation, I show boatloads of ugly Lactobacillus data. And yet on YouTube, I continue to be questioned on this topic. I just follow the data. Don't shoot the messenger. Here in Table 3, I've highlighted those species with significant differences. 3 of the Lactobacillus species were significantly higher in diabetics, while 2 bifidobacterium species were significantly higher in healthy controls. When I compile all of my data points, we get this chart here. As always, green is good and orange is bad. As we can see, for those taxa which consistently stand out from the 1,000 or more species we could consider, we see some of our usual suspects. Nearly always are Eosinophila, Anarostipes, Eubacterium, F. Prausnitzii, and Roseburia significantly higher in the healthy controls, while the very ugly family Enterobacteriaceae, with its poster child E. coli, are always significantly higher in diabetics. And as we see, once again, the genus and species data from Lactobacillus is almost always higher in diabetes as compared to healthy controls. If those with diabetes have significantly more Lactobacillus in their microbiomes as compared to healthy controls, and they have dysbiosis, gut permeability, reduced butyrate production, and systemic inflammation like we saw earlier, then why in the world would you think it's a good idea to take Lactobacillus containing probiotics, or foods like yogurt which contain Lactobacillus species? That makes no sense, and I have so much more in this presentation on this topic. Now let's take a look at some data between the connection of dysbiosis and obesity. I'm not saying that obesity is only caused by dysbiosis. It's a part of a larger equation. Your diet contributes to obesity, but your diet also determines dysbiosis. Antibiotics are used to fatten up feed animals, and antibiotics definitely contribute to dysbiosis. GERD is common in the obese, and the PPIs used for GERD are a certain cause of dysbiosis. Fat tissue can be a source of inflammation from the immune cells from within. Dysbiosis is a source of systemic inflammation as well. Systemic inflammation has been shown to affect insulin production and sensitivity. So again, it's all connected. And I talk about LPS very often. As shown in Figure 1, it's a part of gram-negative bacteria. Not all bad bacteria are gram-negative, but quite a few are. And not all gram-negative bacteria are universally bad, but quite a few are. And not all LPS is equally inflammatory, but serum LPS is a relatively good gauge for systemic inflammation driven by gut dysbiosis. And this can have all sorts of consequences, and for our purposes here, effects on diabetes and obesity. In this study, serum LPS was measured by its binding protein, and as the authors state, quote, LPS, lipopolysaccharide, is a strong stimulatory inductor of the release of several cytokines that are key inducers of insulin resistance and is a putative factor for the triggering of metabolic disturbances. In Figure A, you can see how as serum LPS increases, as shown on the y-axis, levels of hemoglobin A1C and triglycerides increase along with it. A clear correlation between components of metabolic syndrome and a marker for pro-inflammatory dysbiosis. In this paper, the authors recut obesity data from 7 different published studies, using 1,351 stool metagenomic sequencing files from 862 subjects, including samples from China, Australia, Denmark, Spain, and Sweden. They identified 38 bacterial species altered in obesity. They found that many of the health promoters I frequently mention, like species from Roseburia, Allostipes, Acilibacter, Eubacterium, Ruminococcus, and Coprococcus, were significantly enriched in the healthy controls as compared to the obese. And they name R. navis, an opportunistic pathogen I frequently mention, as the primary driver for function enrichment in obesity. So what exactly is function enrichment? Here you can see genes they found enriched in obesity. They discovered a significant correlation between obesity and the richness of bacterial virulence genes, the genes that help bacteria behave more badly. The ones I highlighted play roles in stealing iron from the body's stores. Bad bacteria love iron, and the body works hard to keep it away from them. But the bad guys also work hard to steal it. For more on this, watch my presentation entitled Emotional Stress and its Effects on the Microbiome. And in this meta-analysis using 3,329 samples from 17 countries, they identified 25 highly predictive species and 37 pathway associations as signatures of obesity, which were validated with remarkably high accuracy. The species you can see in B have many of the health promoters I frequently mention, species from Allostipes, Odoribacter, and Acilibacter. Down below, we see a bit of an anomaly with the erect tail, shown to be more abundant in obesity, according to their analysis. In my larger analysis, which we'll see in a minute, I show erect tail as a non-determinant. But this brings up an interesting point, that of energy harvest. Clearly, some people can just look at food and gain weight, while others can't put on weight no matter what they do, if we assume the same diet. Now, a part of this is genes, but let's not put all the blame on obesity itself on genes. That's at only about 10% or so. But, there are some people who can gain weight easier than others. There are your genes to consider, but there are also the genes of your microbiome to consider. There are many studies in humans and animals when the microbiome is transferred between groups. Obesity or weight loss is transferred along with the microbiome. Which brings us back to the topic of energy harvest. Nobody knows, myself included, exactly what's going on here. But since the data for obesity is not quite as perfect for the butyrate-producing health promoters as it is for all other conditions, it appears they play a role in harvesting more energy. With that said, the data is still excellent, and it's infinitely better than the data for the classic bad guys. So there is something else at play when it comes to energy harvest. We just don't know exactly what it is yet. So here is my meta-analysis of all the obesity papers I used. As you can see, Eosinophylla still has great-looking data, allostypes as well. But our superhero F. Prozitii doesn't have the beautiful data as usual, although still quite excellent. But we do see classic bad guys with their classic bad data, like E. coli and Fusobacterium, as well as some curious data from Collinsella and Doria. And once again, we see the supposed probiotic Lactobacillus with another towering column of ugly data points. When we combine the data points for both obesity and type 2 diabetes, we get this chart here. We can see in column 1 that the data for Eosinophylla is excellent. And this is something that is known. When it comes to several conditions, and those involving metabolic syndrome are included, Eosinophylla is highly beneficial, as we'll see later in an intervention trial. And conversely, as we can see here, the combined data for Lactobacillus is horrific. If you're a diabetic and or have obesity, why would you want to add more Lactobacillus to your microbiome when the data clearly shows from many trials that those subjects who are diabetic and who are obese has significantly more than healthy controls? My data points for Lactobacillus come from studies like this one. But I read a line in this paper that had information I had not seen before. I knew that methyl donors and antibiotics were used to increase feeding efficiency for farm animals. In other words, fattening for slaughter. But I did not know that Lactobacillus was as well. In fact, I'll read word for word from their conclusion, which states, quote, Lactobacillus species are widely used as growth promoters in the farm industry and are now linked to obesity in humans. So I had to look into this, and here's what I found. Table 1 from this paper references multiple studies, animals, and strains of probiotics, and talks about, quote, increases in feed conversion, quote, feed efficiency, and quote, live weight. Are these things you want applicable in your pursuit of weight loss? Do you see your probiotics listed here? In Table 1 from this study, they split the species into those which support weight gain and those which support weight loss. The top 2 associated with weight gain are Lactobacillus reuteri and L. fermentum, among other familiar species from Lactobacillus. Are any of these in your probiotic blends? And here is a meta-analysis encompassing numerous human and animal studies, showing the very popular Lactobacillus acidophilus is associated with weight gain. They also highlight L. fermentum as seen in the previous paper. In my meta-analysis for obesity, I only use human fecal microbiome data, no animal data. About half of my data points are at the genus level due to limitations in the 16S technology over the years. So those genus level data points could apply to any one or more species. As for species level data points, the most I have are for L. reuteri, which we saw earlier as well. And here we see references to L. acidophilus, L. reuteri, and L. fermentum. Of note, this paper compared genomes and suspected that certain strains from Lactobacillus participate in lipid digestion in the upper GI, thereby contributing to weight gain. Other than decades of marketing, I don't understand people's need to insist that Lactobacillus probiotics are beneficial and people should be paying their hard-earned money for them. I've had made the case against them in almost every condition one can think of. Also in pH imbalance, in PPI use, in bile acid imbalance, in antibiotic use, and now here for obesity and diabetes. Once again, I'll say that if all of these dysbiotic profiles have significantly more Lactobacillus than the healthy controls, then why in the world would you think that adding more Lactobacillus is going to help? it defies logic. So let's instead focus on the long list of health-promoting bacteria who occupy more real estate, do many more beneficial things, and have data profiles infinitely better than Lactobacillus. These health promoters don't exist as probiotics, but we can feed them. And as shown here in this review of 11 studies, where you can see a synopsis of their designs and results here, the authors found that LPS was significantly lower in those receiving prebiotics. And CRP, C-reactive protein, another measure of inflammation, was also significantly lower in those receiving prebiotics as compared to the other cohort. Again, we're talking about gut permeability and inflammation. Or in this study, where obese subjects consumed a rather complete and intensive fiber supplementation program for 9 weeks. What happened? They lost, on average, 6 kilograms, 13 pounds. Gut permeability improved, and there were significant decreases in plasma LPS, TNF-alpha, as well as bad actors from the family Enterobacteriaceae like E. coli. Are you seeing a trend here? Or, as we see here in Table 2, with the beneficial outcomes to the right. Even considering these good results here, I use more complete protocols, properly dosed and properly blended. For example, if we look at the first line, I don't use FOS, as it gets fermented too quickly. I also use more than 10 grams a day of prebiotics in total. And still, these researchers showed benefit. Imagine how much better the results could be if done more intelligently. And in this prebiotic intervention study, you can read the details of it here. There were more great results for the prebiotic / microbiome / diabetes story. For example, as I keep harping on in my videos, as shown here in C, we see significant differences in butyrate for the high fiber group as compared to the usual care group. Now, this is a shotgun metagenomic study, so they were measuring the genetic potential of the microbiome to produce butyrate as compared to fecal butyrate levels. But honestly, this is probably more accurate, as there are wide disparities in short-chain fatty acid absorption within the GI tract, making fecal butyrate a less than accurate marker, especially when comparing those with obesity. And where was this increase in butyrate potential coming from? From feeding the microbiome with a complex regimen of fibers. And which butyrate-producing, health-promoting superstars, which I always talk about, were significantly increased? F. prausnitzii, E. rectale, E. elegans, species from Ruminococcus, and Clostridium leptum. What other good things happen from this prebiotic microbiome butyrate connection? Here in A, B, and C, we see significant differences in improvement between the two groups in all categories of blood sugar measures. And here in G, we see a very significant difference for something called GLP-1. GLP-1 is one of those signaling proteins I mentioned way back at the beginning. The levels of GLP-1 are much higher in the high fiber group as compared to the normal care group. GLP-1 is a multifaceted hormone, with its most pronounced effects playing roles in metabolic syndrome. In fact, there is a whole set of drugs dedicated to activating this hormone. You know the name of one of these? Ozempic, the wildly popular drug which is indicated for this, but is being used for off-label for weight loss. Guess what? Butyrate does the same thing. One of the many ways butyrate is so beneficial is that it plugs into and activates GLP-1. So why not do it naturally, get a slew of other benefits in the process, and address the root cause? For our last intervention trial, I promised we'd return to eosinophilia, and here we are. In this fascinating study from 2019 out of Belgium, overweight or obese subjects with metabolic syndrome, but who are not diabetic and had normal hemoglobin A1C, were grouped into 3 cohorts: those to receive a placebo, those to receive live eosinophilia, and those to receive pasteurized or dead eosinophilia. After 3 months, believe it or not, the pasteurized Amycinophila had dramatic impacts, significantly improving insulin sensitivity, reducing insulinemia, reducing total cholesterol, and reductions in plasma LPS. Interestingly, in the live Amycinophila group, there were no appreciative changes to the overall microbiome. In other words, the introduction of this bacterium did not result in significant shifts of other inhabitants. Now, the dose was 10 billion bacteria per day, and given the many things this bacterium does in the gut, you'd expect other bacteria to either increase or decrease, but they didn't. However, the true lesson here is that of signaling. Even a dead bacterium is able to plug into, or better said, be read by, your own cells and kick off a set of health-promoting signals that your body carries out. Of course, this is transient only while taking the supplement, which is why you want to have the live bacterium in your gut, and you want to feed it. You can try an Amycinophila supplement in the marketplace, which may have far fewer bacteria than used in this trial, or you can try to increase your levels by feeding the Amycinophila, which is probably already present in your intestines, as most people are shown to test positive for its presence. Once again, I provided you with information you'll find nowhere else. I hit you repeatedly with published research papers. I could include many more backing up what I say, but I try to give you enough exposure to convince you, while at the same time not bore you. I give you credit for being a savvy consumer. I realize that this can get a little complex at times, but I have found that most patients, at times, they know more than their practitioners. After all, you have a vested interest in your own health. Why not learn, especially when the system is most likely failing you? Now, you can try to digest the information I presented and spend time attempting to address your diabetes and/or obesity concerns. Or you can simply purchase one of my protocols or schedule a consultation with me. As straightforward as I try to make my presentations, I find very frequently there are misinterpretations and mistakes, which are simple things to me, but as new patients are not so obvious to everyone else, which is why I just simply recommend you just work with me. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And whether you buy a protocol or schedule a consultation with me, I will always reply to reasonable emails. I'm not going to charge for every little thing. My goal is to get you better as soon as possible. So make your life easier and work with me. If you found this presentation informative, I have many more for free in my YouTube channel and also in the Microbiome University tab on my website, themicrobiomeexpert.com. There you can select from a wide variety of topics. And if you or a loved one are struggling with a disease/condition, I have condition-specific presentations as well, along with their microbiome protocols found within its respective tab on my website.